Recollections of Donnie MacKenzie, Ullapool, ex-1st Battalion the Cameronians, Chindits. This is the remarkable story of Donnie MacKenzie, born 1923, who remembers the details of his wartime service in Burma. Donnie fought with Brigadier Joe Lentane's 111th Brigade in 26 Column, Special Forces, Chindits. His testimony is record to the courage, endurance and sacrifice of those who served in this deadly and often forgotten theatre of war. His memory and descriptions are sharply deployed as he tells us his remarkable story, and display both courage and humility. They provide us with the reality of war and of his own share of fate and fortune. They are at times horrifying, indeed tragic, but like himself, both humour and humanity are also woven through this web of life. We thank you, Donnie. We are privileged to listen. Andrew McMorrine and Cailean Maclean, May 2019.
Well, see, when you were coming in from Inverness and looking across the Loch Broom, that peninsula over on that side, that's where I was born.
Yes.
Over in Logie. And I got my schooling in a little roadside school over there.
Yes.
And there was no road there then. There was no road over that side at all. Wherever you went, you had to go by foot. And the nearest school to us at that time, when I was 5, we had to walk at least 1.5 miles to get to school in the morning, on a bare, just on the grass, like footpath. And then did the same return at night at 4 o'clock. So anyway, my brothers had to do that because I was coming up to school age of 5, and the parents were in dispute with the council about getting a school built in Logie. And they kept the children into school until they got the school. And that went on for nearly 2 years, arguing. Eventually the council built a school, and that was in Logie. Yes. The previous school was in a place called Arden Drain. And then, as I said already, I completed my schooling in Logie School, and I came out of there in 1939. I was 15, and I went to work in Dundonald Estate as a handy boy on the estate. And I think, if I'm right in saying, the wage I got for that was in the region of about £10 for 2 weeks. And see that hill over there? I had to walk across from Logie over to the other side, over that hill, to get to work.
Right.
But I only came home to Logie on the weekends, on Saturday and Sunday. And I can still see my father. As I would come over the skyline, I could still spot him at the end of the house with his binoculars, trying to see me coming.
Yes, yes.
So anyway, then...
Did he have a croft? Was it a croft?
It's a croft, yes, yeah.
And so did you fish as well?
Oh, yes.
So you were used to boats and...
Boats, yes.
Hunting.
I used to go out fishing at 6 o'clock in the morning with my father.
Yes, yes.
Before I went to school.
Yes.
Did you do any poaching?
No, I wasn't a poacher, no, but there's plenty of poaching done over there at that time. Yeah.
And thinking that as boys we were the same, that we were brought up in the islands and such like, and we were in winter time too, that you would be after the geese for the pot.
Yes.
Did you do a bit of that?
No, my father did a bit of that. And what he was getting over there on that hill I'm looking at now, he used to get wild goats on it. And he used to shoot them.
Yes,
yeah.
They did the same.
Yeah.
They were good eating.
Yeah, they were. Yeah. And he got the occasional piece of venison.
Yes.
Which he got from his neighbours. He never did shoot it himself. Yes. But he got the neighbours would always give him a horn lick, you know.
So you lived well from the land?
Yes. Well, actually speaking, I always looked on it, even to this day. The working crofters of that time, during the war, when rationing was so severe, the crofters were actually the best off in finding food for themselves, like where they could find food. You know, whereas you had to go by the rationing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's. I mean, our folk were the same. They used to send stuff to their relatives.
That's
in
right.
Town,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And
So-
but that kind of healthy life and the diet that you had then would perhaps have stood you in good
It's
stead.
good,
maybe.
yes, there's no doubt about it, like, you know.
Mhm.
For them. Yes.
So, did you stay with the estate until you were?
No, I only stayed with the estate for about 6 months. And then I went into the Forestry Commission.
Mhm.
And I could do that from Logie. I used to go cycle the road there then. The road was built in 1935.
Yeah.
And we had bikes and we used to cycle from Logie down up to Lale Forest. You know where that is, when you're coming down from the gorge at Belmore.
Yes. Yes.
All that forestation up there was planted by us in them days, like, you know. And then it came compulsory that the government could send you anywhere in the forestry in the country wherever you were needed. And you couldn't refuse. If you refused, you were automatically called up. So anyway, my brother and I worked in the Lale Forest, and then they decided to send us away to down the Fort William area.
Yes.
And we're in Spain Bridge, and we're living in a bothy on the hillside there.
Yep.
And at that time, the government had imitation pillboxes on the hillside, which were just canvas and a wee light inside them. And when that was to steer the bombers from Fort William factory.
Yep.
And they did come over one night and they plastered that hillside and they plastered all where the imitation things were. And there was only one bomb that went through the Fort William factory and it didn't explode.
Mhm.
Whereas the ones from the hillside made pit holes all over the place. Like, bomb. And anyway, then as time went on, I was there for maybe about a year. Then they decided again that they had to send us away to a place called, away in the wilds in Argyllshire, somewhere.
Yes.
And, well, my brother and I refused to go away down there. And we had to go through to Inverness, the forestry office in Inverness, and explain to them as to why we refused. And they were so digging too deep into our lifestyle, you know. And we said, right, we're not going. Well, and they said to us, do you know the consequences of you refusing to go? I said, well, tell us. Well, you're calling up papers within 7 days. So that's all right. And we'll accept it. So we came home, and right enough, within 7 days, I got my calling up papers. Yeah? And I had to go away down to a place called Dalry down in Ayrshire.
Yes.
And I did my first 7 weeks training in Dalry. And then when I completed that, I got 7 days leave. And then I went back down. No, I didn't go back down to Dalry. I had to go to Fort George. So I did another further spell of training in Fort George, and that's when I learned to drive.
Mhm.
And there, I completed that training there, and then I was sent down to Cromer in England. And this is the coastline where they fully expected the German to make the invasion on that sands, the Cromer sands. Like,
Yes.
you know. So anyway, then we did a power of training there, and then they decided, right, there was a draft to go to the Far East. No, I went out as a Seaforth Highlander out to India, and went to a place called Doolally, and we did our first part of jungle training in Doolally, and it was a jungle area right enough.
Was it very jungly round?
Oh, it really was, like, you know. And they had a big dam, the Aqua Dam it was called there, and they were putting us into this dam to learn to swim. I couldn't swim, and I still can't swim. And every time I tried to swim, my head would go down, my feet would come up. So anyway, that was all right. We completed the training there, and then we were sent up to a place called Imphal, That's on the borderline with Burma. The transfer from the chiefs to the Cameronians happened in India.
In India.
Yeah.
And so, Donny, the 1st Battalion was part of that
111 Brigade.
Which had the 1st Cameronians, the Royal ROR, isn't it? The Royal Regiment. There were 2 British battalions and 3 Gurkha, were there?
The Chindits were made up. See, this all happened to form the Chindits.
Yes.
They went round the different regiments in India.
Yeah.
And they were picking out the A+ men, medical-wise.
They had to be.
Yeah,
They couldn't take anybody.
No. And that's how the Chindits were built up, on the A+ men.
Yes,
that were past fit. And they went out of various regiments. And that's how I went from the Seafers to the Cameronians.
Right.
Because I was an A+ man, like, you know. So anyway, one git, he came round and spoke to each individually. And he said the mission we're going to go on was a mission that no white man had ever ventured into before. So anyway, he says, I'm telling you straight now, he says, face to face. He says, very few of you will come out alive. He says, he told us straight like that, this to them. And well, we just had to accept everything that was said to us. And then as we're there, a few weeks were there, and we could see this massive build-up of planes, gliders, everything building up. They had a big aerodrome at Imphal. And it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger every day with this machinery of planes and gliders and not helicopters, they weren't in then. But mules, a big contingent of mules came in, horses, and again we're all taken out on parade. And again one gets said, spoke to us while we were on parade. And he says, I'm not giving you a date, but he says he's coming very close to you going on your adventure. That's the way he put it, like, you know. So anyway, that was all right. And it came to the darkness of the day coming in, late evening, I would say maybe about 4 o'clock. And this roar of engines broke up, and nothing but engines running and running. The big planes that are going to tow the gliders and that, like, and so anyway they started.
Those Dakotas, were they using those?
Dakotas, yes. And then they started trying to get the mules into the planes, and that was a job and a half or 2. And the funny thing is, they got the horses in, no bother, but the mules were very determined, like, and they had to push them in with straps on the backside and push them into the plane, like, you know.
And had they made stalls in the
Yes,
plane?
there was stalls in the gliders, like, you know, and there was 2 horses, 2 mules, and 4 personnel in the gliders alone. And then there was the other gliders that took the biggest bulk of the men. But the one that I was in, I happened to be in a horse and mule plane glider. And the place was just roaring with engines running, like, you know. And one was asking the other, how long are we going to be in this glider, I wonder, like, you know. And the sergeant said, don't worry. He says, it'll not be a long journey, it'll be quite short. And so we just flew over the mountains from Imphal. Imphal was just over the border from Burma. It was in India, like, you know, but it was over the border, on the borderline. So anyway, it was getting darker and darker. The evening was coming down darker. And the rain started coming down, pouring rain, monsoon showers, yeah. So anyway, we got over the area where they were going to drop the gliders or loosen the gliders off. And we couldn't see much for the darkness and the rain and that, like, you know. And we weren't seeing what was below us. We couldn't see what was below us.
Probably just as well.
Yes, it was. So anyway, all the first inkling we got were coming down, landing on the trees. the glider just landed on the trees. after the quota had loosened it off, it just glided down and landed on top of the tree. And there's the mass of these mules and horses kicking and batting away at the side of the hills.
But the canopy, the forest canopy, was enough to cushion you.
Yes, oh yes, yes.
And how on earth did you get the beasts out and down on the ground?
Well, funny enough, yes, just to say that, the branches, wait, I see now, if I can give you a rough idea of the height of that trees there. They would be much similar to that, the height of them.
Mm-hmm.
But funny enough, they got them glided down to the main trunk part of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, the sides of the planes broke away, the gliders just drifted away and the mules got off, loosened the ropes and they got out on their own. And the horses, like, you know. But they had a lead in them,
Yes,
yeah. But
some feat in its own.
it really was, yes. And we had no idea where we were going. We had no idea what was in front of us. We were wondering, it was an amazement, you know. I really can't understand to this day how the Japanese never went for us when we landed in that trees, like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We never seen a Jap,
No.
not a sight of any enemy at all. And we went then set off, got ourselves organised in columns and platoons. I don't know yet how the engineers, how
Yes.
did they manage to make a compound with barbed wire. I never ever found this out. How or when did
They drop that?
Yeah, yeah. And I had all that compounds made
Mm-hmm.
for the mules with barbed wire to hold them.
Like a fortress
Yeah,
box.
yes,
thing.
yeah. Our columns were then split down to sections. And there was 4 sections a column, you know. And they had the mules carrying the various weapons, the vicars, and what was the other one you mentioned then?
The mortars.
The mortars.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had the radio, mules carrying
Yes,
the radios. And then they had
And did the radios ever work?
very, very, very close.
Very
And we all had what we called walkie-talkies.
Mhm.
You were armed with more stuff hanging to your body than there was actually.
Well, of course, because he had been across to Canada and and America, and they'd got. You were probably slightly ahead of the other units in that respect.
Yeah. We carried a knife about that length. We called it the jungle knife.
Yes.
And it was strapped to our legs here.
Yes.
And on this leg then you carried what they call a water shuggle. And that was a canvas bag that carried water for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the biggest problem with that. The water was an awful problem. And anyway, we had to hack that jungle with these big knives, hack our way through the jungle to get a passageway through it, like. And you were exhausted by the time you did, yes.
And of course, it's the heat is so
Oh, yes.
enervating. You'd be dripping with
Yes.
moisture and insects and
J-
leeches. You mentioned.
Leeches, don't mention these things.
No.
These leeches near took my life. They took more blood than me than the Japanese took off me. Yeah, they were horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And the snakes were another problem.
Yeah.
You were hacking away at that jungle to get that passageway through, and the flipping snakes were up in the branches, like, you know. And we just used to cut their heads off, or cut them along with the branches. And
you, of course, the thing was full of all sorts of things. Dysentery was a problem. The malaria.
malaria
And
was
you
a
were
problem.
saying you were fortunate to an extent in that you were a carrier.
Yes, I was a carrier. Yes, I never took an attack of malaria at all.
I mean, that's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yes.
Because a lot of them would have been suffering terribly.
Oh, terrible, yeah.
And did they have any pills to give you, or?
Yes, we had to take a salt tablet at night, last thing at night. We had a special parade for that. and a malaria tablet.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we took that every night before we lay down.
And did that help? Yes.
Well, it must have, as far as I'm concerned, I never, well, I could only see what the boys looked like that had malaria, like, you know. And they were just next to nothing. They were just mobile and no more. Between starvation and malaria, that was terrible.
And they did attempt to fly the worst ones out every so often.
Well, that's the trouble. They hadn't got an airport big enough in Burma to get them out. And they only had that little, what we call the American Stilton, which would only carry 2 people. Yeah. And that's what one of the kids himself got killed in.
Is that what he died in?
He died in one of them. He crashed into a mountain.
And who took over from him? Was it a brigade? Was it
Lentine. Yes.
Lentine,
Yeah.
Lentine, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a postscript to the Wingate himself, Donnie, I mean, one hears slightly controversial thing of him. Of course, he would impinge on the powers that be.
He was partially a madman.
Yes. Yes.
We did admire the way he came and spoke to us individually.
And he was very forthright.
He was very straight to the point, like, you know.
It wasn't quite. Well, he wasn't telling you any lies.
Oh no, he wasn't telling lies.
And Donnie, once you set off hacking through the jungle, what were your instructions? What were you being told to do?
The main object of it was, see, the Japanese had the front line between India and Burma. And the only means of transportation they had to get their supplies up to the Indian border was to get them up through Burma. And the only way they could get them up was the Chinwin River, the Irrawaddy River, and the one railroad. There's only one main railway line in Burma, and one Burma road, main road. And that was their means of getting the supplies up from Rangoon up to the Indian border. And our mission was to cut all that supplies getting up to the Indian border, which we did by blowing up the Burma road in a number of places. The Burma railway line, we did likewise. The Chinwin River, we blocked that off, and the Irrawaddy. And I personally crossed the Irrawaddy on the mule's tail. Very, very thrown animal. Thrown animal. But yes, I would say once they go to know their mission, they realise what they had to do, like, you know. And what they realised of what they had to do, they had a lot of faith in us as well. Same as we had with them, like, you know. Yeah. And that time we got Salvin River to Scotland, we got ambushed in the middle of it. A convoy of mules and a convoy of men had to get across that river. And we got the biggest contingent of them across. And then we got fired at, right in the middle of the water. And as I said already, I couldn't swim. So I just hung on to the mule. And I was a Bren gunner. I had the Bren gunner and the Bren gun on my shoulder. And once I got to the other side, we were still getting fired at by Japanese bullets, and we couldn't understand where they were. We couldn't see them. And the jungle was that thick, and they were clever enough to build like shacks up in the trees, and they used to have snipers in these. And it's one of these snipers that got us caught in the middle of the river. So a Sergeant Donald, and he managed to get on the back. He got up the embankment and he managed to get away. Yeah, I don't know. How many had with him, I don't know. But we had to scramble up that bank, and it was a bank quite steep, and the soil was like clay.
Yes, yes.
You know that bluey clay?
Yes,
and it stuck to you like chewing gum.
Yeah.
So we scrambled up through that, and then my poor mule got shot. But I managed to scramble up the mud, and I got to the other side, and I rigged up my Bren gun on the bank on the other side, and I got shot at that time, but I never I carried a wee New Testament Bible in my tunic pocket here, and a cigarette case.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother gave me a silver cigarette case when I went away, a 10 cigarette case, and I had the case I had the Bible next to my body and the cigarette case on top of it. And this bullet ricocheted right off, and it burnt the tunic pocket here. It must have ricocheted off the cigarette case. So another one went through my hat, but nothing. I never lost any blood. So I got into position on the other side, and they sprayed that trees in front of me on the other side with bullets with the brain gun. That quietened them down. I must have got them. Yeah.
That's remarkable. And I believe the Sergeant Donald, did he not get a DCM?
He did. He went round the other side, further up the river,
Yes.
and he got in behind thing they had an embedded thing in the sand,
Yes, sir.
and he got them in there, and he blew them up with grenades.
And Donnie, it's maybe a point to say, I mean, obviously there was no love lost between any of our Commonwealth or troops and the Japanese, and they were not people who surrendered.
Oh no. Oh no.
They would keep fighting
Oh
to
yeah.
the very
Yeah.
end.
Oh yeah.
So there was no mercy given.
They believe, that was their belief. If they died for the country.
And of course, in the columns, you couldn't have taken prisoners back. You could.
Oh no,
you
we
could only
couldn't.
survive on your own.
Oh no, we couldn't. I don't think we took a prisoner.
No.
No. Well, I don't think so.
But you certainly respected them as fierce fighters.
Oh yes, I do, yes.
But they weren't supermen. Or do you think they were pretty tough?
It's hard to say how an actual hand-to-hand engagement would take place between them, which fortunately it never happened. We never had hand-to-hand fighting, like, you know. So as for being fighters, we couldn't really tell because it was all undercover. And when I say that, undercover, we're in jungle all the time, like, you know. Apart of when we were laying the mines and the things to blow up the barges in the rivers, or same on the road, we had to see our way. But again, that was done mostly in the darkest evening time.
Yes, yes.
We lay low during the day mostly.
That initial part of the sabotage and the cutting of the road and the river routes and things, that was deemed to have been very successful.
Oh, very, very
Very
successful, yeah.
successful. And that really saved the Imphal and the India.
Do you know this? I honestly believe it saved the world.
Yes.
Because if the Japanese had got through into India,
Mm-hmm.
they would have conquered India like that. And then where they would go, they would connect with Hitler and Europe.
Yeah.
And they would have won the war. They would have done.
And it wouldn't have been a pretty sight. I mean, they may complain of the imperial nature of the British and the French and things, but my goodness, look at what they did in China.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
I think you're probably right. It would have been a very, very different world.
It would have been a very, very different. If the Germans and the Japanese had met each other, it would have been a different world altogether. Fortunately, no. We left very few of them alive, you know, as far as the Jap army were concerned. Because that night we got an awful plastering ourselves, a terrible plastering, and loss of life was colossal.
Was this when you were back in the box, the fortress?
Yes, that's when we were back.
Was it called Aberdeen or?
No, Blackpool.
Blackpool. Blackpool.
Yeah.
And there was a point where they took the strip.
Yes,
and
that's
then over
right.
the airstrip.
Yeah.
And then they did, some of them got into the edge of the box too.
They did. They actually caught one of our supply planes that came in with, made a forced landing on that strip.
Right.
And it had to make, and when they were emptying supplies out of that plane, the Japanese came in and attacked it, like, you know.
That was a bitter fight.
It was a bit, yeah.
And you lost quite a few men.
Lot of men there, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And after that, you slowly withdrew. Did you came back then? Did you start moving?
Well, we realised that the Japanese were more or less beat because the engagements became weaker and weaker and weaker. And we realised then that we were winning. And that was their last stand, was that terrible night that we got the battery. Mm-hmm. And they just vanished into thin air after that. Do you know, when we got that order, this, I don't know what he was or what rank he was, but he came running in the early hours of the morning. And there was nothing but bodies lying everywhere, like, you know. And he came round and he said, "Look," he says, "I'm delivering an order that it's a case of every man now for themselves to get themselves out of this. We can't do any more of this. And we're no means of getting an organisation done. It's a case now for everybody, individually, for themselves." So there was 3 of us in that hole in the ground, and we discussed what are we going to do. Will we make a move to get out now or wait? And I suggested to them, well, I said, "Look," I said, "I think our best chance of escaping out of here is lay low, just lie low where we are and listen, and to see if there's any movement at all round about us." So we did. We just sat there and talked among ourselves, and we give an odd peer out to see could we see anything outside, and there was no sound, no nothing, no visibility of any me around apart from the dead bodies. No, not a sound did we hear of anything. It was just dead quiet, just like a yeah. And anyway, in the evening, I would say we had to go. The sun was out time, like we had no means of what time of hour or day it was. We just had to go by the sun. And we were issued a wee compass and a map. And I was quite good at reading the map and the compass. And I set it, well, the sun's going down there, it's rising over there. I said, if we make for the away from the east, that's where the sun rises. If we make away from the east and go either south or west. So yes, that's what we decided we'd do that then. And we went away and we had no strength left. We were just a breathing body, that's all we were. And we crawled on our bellies because we didn't want to stand up or anything like that. So we crawled on our bellies. I honestly don't know how far we did, the 3 of us. And we were just exhausted, so we just lay and give up the ghost more or less. And there was an area of land with no trees in it, and it was all planted with Japanese flags all round about it. And I said to myself, that's a funny thing, that must be a bit of land that they've claimed for their purposes. So we'll keep it to that altogether. It was a clear area, like, you know. We'll stay into the jungle. So we moved into the jungle deeper away from that clearance. And as we were lying there one day, I don't know how many days we were crawling around there. It was days, it wasn't hours, it was days. And
by this time you've had no supplies or...
Not a thing. Oh, not a thing. We had nothing. And the water was the problem. We couldn't get decent water at all. And anyway, the monsoons came down, And what we managed to do, we had that what we call billy cans, mess tins, and we tapped as much of the water as we could in our mess tins, and we put it into the chuggers we had on the side of our leg, and that kept us alive. And the only other thing we could eat, we used to find, funny enough, them bananas, wild bananas, not them, but wild bananas growing in the jungle, and that's what kept us alive. We're taking them off the trees. There wasn't many of them, but there was enough to eat, like, you know.
Yes, yes.
In fact, we didn't know whether they were edible or not.
Yeah.
And there was another little bush, and it had a red berry on it, like a blaeberry, but
Yes,
it was
yeah.
red.
Mm-hmm.
And we were wondering, was that edible or not? So anyway, we looked on the lines. Well, the monkeys are living on them. The monkeys have eaten them. So if they can eat them and digest them, why can't we? So that's what we did. We started picking the berries off the bushes, like, you know, and we lived on them. But anyway, as time goes on, I don't know how many days, I said we were there, breathing and no more. And we were lying exhausted, and we were just like looking along like over there, and we could see these figures moving about in the jungle. And I remember saying to one another, after blooming Japs, and they're coming our way. So we just lay flat on our bellies there and just waited to see how near they would come, if we could realise who they were. And as they came closer, I remember saying to one of the boys, they're not Japs. And as they came closer, we noticed then they were more darkened skinned than the Japs, like, you know. They were really dark skinned. So they came close, and we put our hand up like that to them, you know. We thought we had it. So don't worry, boys. We are your friends. We are not your enemies. And they said, we are being sent out by the British Red Cross to look for the likes of you, anyone we could come across and pick up. And they were Nigerians.
Nigerians.
And they had the Red Cross on their tunics, like, you know. So now, relax, he kept saying to us. And anyway, he said, we're going to take it to a point where we're going to get you out of here. So we had 2 stretchers with them, bamboo stretchers. And my eyesight was just next to nil. I could hardly see a thing. I had jaundice, like really, really bad jaundice. Yeah. And I only weighed, I knew I had no weight until I got into hospital. And anyway, they took us to this lake, and there was a Sunderland flying boat on the lake, and they took us out on a raft from land onto the plain in the lake. And that seaplane took us to the Brahmaputra River in India. And it landed there, and luck would have us again. When it came down in the lake, they didn't know, they hadn't a clue how deep that lake was. And then they damaged the undercarriage of the plane. And when it came down to land on the Brahmaputra River, it started taking water. And I still hear these words, come on boys, get them off quick, the plane is sinking. And this was the crew.
But after all this?
Yes, I know. So anyway, they took us then up to a hospital away up on the foot of the Himalayan mountains. Shillong was the name of the place. And it was a lovely hospital. I was in there for about 7 to 8 weeks in there to build myself up again. At least they built me up. And I asked the nurse one day, how heavy I am, what's my weight? What's your normal weight? She says to me like that. What are you normally? I says, well, about maybe 10 stone. She says, you are now exactly half what you were, 5 stone. And This is a thing that hurt me very much. You know, the clothes that we were in, it was between monsoons and ground and gravel and clay and what have you. It was just like a board. It was just like a cardboard box on our bodies, like, you know. As if you're encaged in a cardboard box.
Yes, sir.
So they took all that off us, and I still had my cigarette and my keys in my tunic pocket.
Yes, sir.
And I had this, which we all had, an identity disc around our neck with our name and our number, our army number. 4 digits of a number, like, you know. And my number was Mackenzie 14. That's what I was always known as, like, you know. So anyway, they left that on my neck, but the rest they took it. And when I asked what happened, my little but a few souvenirs I hope to have, she said, it all up in ashes. They burnt the lot. As they stripped us off, they burnt it, like, you know. Mm-hmm. So I lost my New Testament, and I lost my cigarette case, and I lost my identity disc. And nothing. Not one iota had I got. Yeah. And the clothes inside of it, I think we got one shift all the time we were in. We were in that cardboard box all the time. Mm-hmm. It either got soaked with rain or it got burnt with the sun. One or the other. If you got a monsoon shower coming down on you, the sun came out as hot as fire, like, you know, and baked it on you. And I was just as weak as a kitten. And I remember going to the MO in the morning, and my hands were just red. And he says, where are you wounded? I says, I'm not wounded. I says, it's the leeches. I've been sucking my blood all night. Oh, he says, you must have lost a lot of blood. He says, because your hair is just matted with it, like, you know. And he said, well, he says, yes. He says, you've got 4 leeches that have been sucking your blood all night, more or less. Oh, they were horrible things.
Oh, horrible.
And they used to go in the shoes and the eye holes for your laces in your boots. Yes. So you get in there. Well, the food rations, yes, what they call the American K rations. Yeah. And in that K ration, a box about that size and that deep, like, you know. And there was 3 little round tins. One was spam, other one was cheese, and another was like corned beef, American. And a packet of 4 biscuits, a packet of 5 cigarettes, and 2 packets of chewing gum. That was the consistence of that K rations, like. Now the one with the scrambled eggs looking thing, that was your breakfast one. And the other one in the middle was lunchtime cheese. And the other one, the corned beef, that was your that was your evening meal. That was the food side of it, one day. Yeah.
And it just managed to keep you going.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you were talking about the snakes. They could have been eaten.
Oh God, I wouldn't eat the food for them.
I wouldn't like to do it.
I'm not saying it wasn't done by some of the boys. I'm not saying that they could have done it, like, you know. They could have done it. I remember one day they had to kill a mule. This mule was very thorn, very stubborn. It wouldn't do what it was told. So the commanding officer decided, right, we have no food. We'll kill the mule. We'll kill the name of the mule. But I couldn't eat that either. Couldn't. To think, to go and start eating a poor mule, that was more or less your safe line, like, you know. We went in there in April. See this? That was in the month of April. That's when we went in shortly. That's a poem that 5 of us put together, like, you know.
It's saying from March to July.
That would be about it, yes. Yes, that would be about
So
it.
you're in there for quite some time.
Yeah.
So tell us about this poem, Donnie.
Well, this poem was on moving from the area between the Chindit River and the Irrawaddy River. And we had to get from across that jungle space of land between the 2 rivers. And as the column was moving on through it, we were just talking away to ourselves, you know, talking a lot of rubbish. And we decided then, we'll put a poem together. And that's just a poem. On the 18th day of April, in the year of 44, when the boys of the Cameronians went marching to the fore, it was early in the morning as the Chindits were standing to. They met and fought the enemy on the road to Pinlaboo. Pinlaboo is a little wee village, half the size of Ullapoly, and they more or less ambushed us on that run. We more or less came to hand fighting in that one, because we were off the road and they were coming marching up the road. And that's when I say we met and fought the enemy on the road to Pinlaboo. And we were on the hillside and we were waiting for them to come closer, and we got them and we ambushed them on that road. And I don't think we left many of them alive. So bring on your Imperial Army and we'll show you how it's done. We are the boys of the Cameronians, the famous 111. So remember Mr Churchill on your staff at GHQ. Don't forget Joe Lenin, I can't pronounce his name like that. Ghost Force. Don't forget Lenin's Ghost Force, who proves so brave and true. Remember the fight for Blackpool, when the Cams proved they were the best, with men such as Sergeant Robbie, with his MM on his chest. We were led by Major Brennan, Hushed, Borden and two. We fought our way through jungle and got our wounded through. Now a word for Mad Calvert, the hero of Mogan, who led the famous Chindits. That force were mighty strong. We fought the Japs and beat them, and we got there to stay, and all left the road wide open for the fight for Mandalay. Now think of the 14th Army, the boys who fought so well, and then homes in dear Blighty, and folks they lived so through. Of the hardships they were suffering, no one. My brother Evie, he was out there as well, but he went out, he was in the Seaforth. Mm-hmm. And he went out in 1939. In fact, he was the first called-up conscript from Ullapool to go into in 1939. Mm-hmm. And he was sent out to Hong Kong. And then he continued with the Seaforth. And as I was out one day in that hospital I was out having a walk, and this army convoy of trucks came up the road, and I had to step aside to make the room for them off the road, like. And one truck stopped right in where I was standing, and I noticed on the side the badge, HD, Highland Division. And I shouted to the boys in the back, "What regiment are you, the Seaforth?" "Yes, we are the 1st Battalion of the Seaforth Highlanders." "Oh," I says, "do you know an Evie Mackenzie then?" "Yes, she's in that truck in front of us." Yeah, and Evie came out of the truck and he came down and he said, "What in the world are you doing here?" And that's after seen me for 5 years, like, you know.
My goodness.
Yeah, and he says, "Well, we are going to be camping just up the road from here for the night. We're out on a manoeuvre." And he says, "I'll come back down." He says, "Where are you?" I says, "In the hospital, just up the road there a bit." He said, "I'll come back down and see you later on." So he did, and we went out and had a bottle of beer down in the Church of Scotland canteen. That's what it was, a Church of Scotland canteen. And as we had a bottle of beer, and the girl that served us at the counter, I says to Evie, I says, "Look," I says, when I ordered that drink, that voice seems Scottish." And I took the card, I'm going to ask her. And I went up and asked her, "Are you Scottish?" And she says, "Yes." She says, "I'm Scottish." I says, "What part of Scotland do you come from?" Oh, she's laughed and she says, "A place you would never have heard of," she says like that. And I says, "Come on, tell me more." And I was beginning to get to recognise her as I was talking, like, you know. And she says, well, I come from a place called Letters and Logie. And I says, that's a coincidence. And she says, how? I says, well, I'm from Logie and you from Letters, you see. Oh, and then she said, what's your name? And I told her. Oh, good gosh, she says. And I'm Betty Mackenzie, she says like that. Yeah? Oh, she was all over Evie and I, like, you know. Mm-hmm. And she went and got a cup of coffee and tea and whatever we wanted for us, like. These Church of Scotland canteens were marvellous things. Yes, yeah. They were everywhere in the world, like, during the war. Mm-hmm. And anyway, Evie came down that night and we had another bottle of beer. Well, we could afford anyway.
I mean, that's a wonderful one, isn't it? But the one of finding your brother in the Seaforth corridor.
Yes, just out having a walk.
I know.
Had he any notion as to where you had been?
He had no idea where I was. And I hadn't got much time to explain to him anything, like, you know. And I did mention I was in Burma, I was out of the Burma campaign. I says, I was in there with the Chindits. Oh. And he says, how are you in hospital now here? Yes, I says, I am. He says, oh, good gosh. He says, there's nothing much left of you. He says, that's the very words he said, there's nothing much left of you.
That's only a brother can.
And did Evie get home?
No, Evie didn't get home until after I got home. That's a good story too. More story. When I came out of the hospital, I was sent back down to Pune. And I had to travel from the Himalayan mountains down to Pune. All of my Jackie Jones, all I had was my pass, army pass. And travelled on that train, I think it took a whole blooming day to go down from one point to B. And all the natives hanging on to the outside of it, like, you know. I remember it stopped at a station. And I got out of it, and I walked up to the engine, and I says, you've got hot water in the train? He says, yes. He says, how? I says, well, I've got a billy can here. I says, can you fill it up for me? He says, what are you going to do? And he was an Indian, but he had good English, like, you know. Yes, I'm trying to make myself a cup of tea. He said, have you got tea? No, I said, I haven't. I'm all joking. I said like that to him, like, you know, I just wanted the water. Oh, he says, we'll do better than that for you. And he made a cup of tea for us. And I went back to the train. I arrived in Pune, and I reported there. And it was all under canvas, the camp, like, you know. And I had to give all my details to who I was and what I was on. And he says, yes. He says, that's right. And the reason why there was such scarcity of soldiers walking about, because they were rebuilding, in the process of rebuilding the regiment with new recruits out from Blighty. And then the next expedition was Singapore. But anyway, it so happened that my padre came to me one day and he says to me, Donnie, he says, I want a consultation with you. I says, yes. He said, can you come up to my office, to my tent tomorrow morning? I went. And he says, I've got good news for you and I've got bad news for you. He says, which would you like to hear first? I says, give me the bad news first, I said. And he says, well, he says, do you know a lady by the name of Mrs. Mitford in your hometown? Yes. Well, she says, she's the representative with the War Office concerning the soldiers of Lochbroom. And she is trying at the moment with the War Office to get you sent home on compassionate grounds. Oh, I says, come on, I says, tell me more. And he says, well, the reason for this is your mother's on her deathbed. And we're trying to get you home. She's trying to get you home in time before she goes. And my mother was in Rigmore Hospital at the time. So anyway, Yes, he says, we'll try and get you home as fast as possible. And he says, funny enough, there's a troop ship in Bombay now, red sailing, going to Britain. He says, I will try to get you down to Bombay in time to go on that ship. So I travelled again from Pune to Bombay on my own. And I was just walking, I was completely lost, an individual soldier walking about in Bombay harbour on his own. And these two red caps, police, army police, were in front of me. And they stopped me. And they says, who are you? Are you a deserter? I says, no. I says, I'm not a deserter. Have you any documentation on you? I said, yes, I've got my train warrant on me. That's all I've got. Where did you come from? All that questions, like, you know. And I said, we'll take you up to a camp in Bombay here, and we'll put you in that camp for the night, and we'll take it from there. So they put me into this camp in Bombay. Right enough, the following morning, they came and took me and put me on this ship in Bombay. And the name of the ship was the Strathnaver. And I don't know how many weeks it took us to sail from Bombay to Southampton. And another experience I got in that, even on the sea, I was up on the top deck, lying out in blazing sunshine on the deck, and in the early hours of the morning, this body flew over the top of me like that, right over the side of the ship, like, you know. Oh dear, dear. And I got up, and I got a hold of her life when I threw it over the side. But I don't know what happened. But anyway, I ran up and I said, ran down the ship, and I told to them, I said, look, there's a boy after jumping over the side of the ship. And the captain got word of it. So he did one circle round over the boat, but no, there was no sign of him. But the Red Sea was, man, he would have been 18 minutes with the sharks, like, you know. Yeah. And he happened to be a well-guarded, what do you call it, Doolally, we called it Doolally tap. Mm-hmm. And they always used to take them to the wash house on the ship before the rest of the troops got on a wash. They did the inmates first, like, you know. And
he must have broken loose.
Yeah, he broke loose on the guard, yes, he got it free. And he just went and did for himself. He just jumped over the side, like, you know. Yeah. Anyway, going back to Southampton, came up to Southampton, landed there. And they hadn't a clue what they were going to do with me when I got there. And I stayed in a camp for the night, and then they sent me up to Hawick.
And the borders.
Yeah, and the border regiment, yeah. And I stayed the night there, and they took the documentations I had on me and they read through them. And they were trying to get, what they were trying to do was to get into an army camp nearest to Ullapool. And the nearest one they could get was Murrayford and Strathpeffer. The Seaforth were in the Highland Hotel in Strathpeffer at the time, so I was in the Highland Hotel for the night. And then they took me up to Murrayford, and it was the RASC supply depot. Murrayford station was a very, very busy station during the war. They were supplying all the units from in the Highlands right down to Elgin. All the different units, Air Force, Army, even Navy. They were supplying Lochhew and Lochhew. And I got the job of looking after the different orders that went on different trains to various points and seen them locked up, the different orders, and dispatched to the different areas they had to go to. And the German prisoner of war camp on the Bran, they were supplied from Murrayford as well. So then as time went on, I would say maybe 10 days maximum. The officer in Museford was very, 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 very decent to me. And he made sure that I got as much time off as possible to get through to Inverness, to the hospital. And my mother was sent home, to pass away, like, more or less, you know. And she lasted, I would say, maybe 2 weeks maximum, and she died.
And your brother, Evie, you called him?
Mm-hmm.
What's that? What's
Ewan.
Evie. And he got back after you?
No, Evie didn't get home at all. He got home on this, he didn't get compassionate grounds, like, you know. He didn't get any. I don't know whether this Mrs. Mitford of the War Office was in touch with him or not. I couldn't really tell you. But they were really quick in getting me home. Really good they were, like, you know.
Which was remarkable.
It was remarkable, yes, yeah. And
I suspect after having been where you were and what you were doing, they probably thought they owed you something.
well, maybe they might have looked at it that way right enough, yeah. These two red caps were the most awkward ones in Bombay Harbour, because I thought they had somebody had jumped ship sort of thing, like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I got a surprise when the wee bit of documentation I had Mrs. Mitford's letter and a documentation I got from the camp in Pune. That's all I had. But I realised I was on a mission, not a deserter, like, you know.
And maybe again the Chindit legend came with you as well there, because they would be well aware you'd been at the very front.
Well, they didn't deny my regiment because I still had my cap with my badge on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, I'll be quite honest with you, and I fully believe it. And my prayers were answered 3 times. That day that we're told it was a case for every man for himself, I just stood up on the edge of the wee hole I was in, and I put my 2 hands up like that. I'm in your hands. I got that answered. Another time I was sent out with a mate to deliver a message from one platoon to another, and there was no roads in Burma apart from the roads I mentioned, but there was elephant tracks, and we call them elephant roads, like, you know. Mm-hmm. And we came to this, to deliver this message to the other platoon. I delivered it, and then on our way back, we came to this elephant roundabout. Which track did we come on? Was it that one, or that one? And my mate said to me, well, if you go up that track, I'll go down this track and see if I get my bearings. And he did, and I came back, and I straight where I left out from, but he never came back. And I waited and waited, no sign of him coming. So anyway, I set off back on my own, and I got back and I reported I've lost Terry. Terry was his name. I said, I lost Terry. He said, how do you mean you lost Terry? I said, I explained to him. And they said, oh, well, we'll have to send a recce out to try and find him. Found him, all right. Was his head missing? He walked into a Japanese patrol, and they beheaded him. They got his body with no head.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And that is actually in the regimental account there, I think, too.
Is it?
Horrendous. But not in the detail you've given. It's a thought of the whole thing, isn't it?
You're saying, Donnie, your prayers were answered 3 times?
Yes, 3 times. Well, that was one time. When I was coming back, I was walking along the track, and there was in the soil in Burma, there was what we called bogs. And they were very deep bogs, and you didn't know how deep they were. And I was just walking back. I stepped off the track and went to the other side. And what did I do? Walked right into a bog. And oh, dear. And around the mule encagement, they had a night patrol going round the mules, watching them all the time. And I started shouting. And this boy heard the voice, and he followed my voice, and he managed to pull me out of that bog with a branch of a tree. Now, my feet never touched that bog yet. There could have been a crocodile or anything in it, you know. And he pulled me out, and again, I answered my prayers there. I got my prayers answered there. My life wasn't meant to go. And the third time was that when that Nigerians got a hold of it, they arrested us, like, you know. Because I had given up the ghost by that time, because I had no strength left. Neither of us had any strength left. Well, one of the boys died, the third fellow died. But the other fellow, he had no strength left, and I never met him again. After the Nigerians picked us up, I don't know where he was taken to, but I was taken on my own, like, you know.
It is. But you're making me think of what, remember the old cat badge? I remember an old fellow telling me that it's the star, the mullet of Douglas. But their lines were the star to guide us,
Yes.
the bugle to call us, and the 10 thistles for the 10 commandments that bind us.
Yeah, very good.
And it had that.
I didn't hear that one now.
No?
No.
It's quite a nice one.
It is a nice one. And it's reality.
It is reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
I knew it was. Would your verdict be that it was some regiment?
Covenanters. Well, they were the Holy Regiment. Covenanters.